Hi, good morning, everyone. Well, in this talk, I would like to touch upon why security, and in particular routing security, is hard in a highly decentralized system like the internet, but also present an approach as a potential way forward. Well, BGP is insecure in the sense that it doesn't have a built-in mechanism to allow one network to validate an announcement it gets from its neighbors. 1.5 years ago, I think, BGP security extensions were standardized in the IETF, but it will take quite some time before we see them deployed. Already today, though, with the tools we have, we can, I think, make significant improvements in the state of the routing security. To make it happen, other things need to take place. One of them is data. And no matter what kind of tools you're using, I think you need the data that authoritatively state the authority of a network to announce certain prefixes. This data at the moment is incomplete and incorrect to a certain extent. But more challenging thing are incentives. Routing security is as technological as socioeconomic problem. Moral hazard, information asymmetry, those economic phenomena, they hinder deployment of security technologies like routing security. And unless we invent or find out incentives why operators should employ those controls, I think we can expect much progress in this area. But what is also missing on this picture is this overlap between these three circles. The overlap we're trying to make bigger. And this overlap is action, because without this action by network operators, nothing will really happen in this world. So before I go into this action thing, let me talk a little bit about the problem. So according to a great public service called BGP Stream that displays some data about routing incidents on the internet globally, last year, in 2018, about 13,000 incidents happened. 40% of them, almost 40% of them, were routing security attacks or incidents like route hijack or route leak. About 4.4% of all autonomous systems on the internet were affected by those incidents. Almost 3,000 autonomous systems fell victim to one of those attacks. And 1,300 networks were responsible for about 5,000 routing incidents over a year. So I think that says there is a problem. I did a similar presentation last year where I looked back in 2017, and while looking at the caveats that this routing view and detection of those incidents presents, one thing that I thought that if we apply the same methodology again and again, while absolute numbers and numbers may not be absolutely accurate, I think we can get a much more accurate picture about the trend, how the system evolves. So that's what I did. I looked at the same, at the data in 2018, applying the same methodology, and here's what I got. Well, I think it's a positive thing. We see those errors going down, meaning that we have reduced almost 10% reduction in number of incidents, 17% reduction in number of culprits, 12% of victims, and about 1% less autonomous systems were affected. Interestingly enough, that distribution between outages and routing incident remains stable. Just an observation. But I think while two points do not represent a trend, so it's hard to say whether it's an ongoing trend and we should expect this to continue, or this is just one-off. What is clear from absolute numbers that the problem still exists. I think that's too early to rest. Let's zoom a little bit into this data. So if we talk about victim, US leads the list with about 600 networks implicated, being victims of 1,200 incidents. They are followed by Brazil, Russia, and Bangladesh. But absolute numbers, they not tell the full story, of course, because, well, some countries have more networks operating there, and some countries have less. So if you normalize this data by number of networks announced in the country, the picture is slightly different. And we see that Bangladesh, mainland China, and Hong Kong leading the list, with almost up to 30% of all networks in the country affected by a routing incident, which is pretty high. Dynamics, though, is positive. Well, part of Bangladesh and China, we see in other countries reduction. And those are top 10 countries that I identified in 2017 routing analysis. So you can see that in all other countries, there's a decrease in number of victims. In particular, you can see Brazil and India performed quite well in this respect. Moving to culprits on a country level, you can see that mainland China and Hong Kong, again, are leading the list of culprits. But if we look at the regional level, and that's the right chart, Micronesia leads the list, but they only have one network, one culprit out of 20 networks operating in this region. Other than that, it's Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, and Latin American, Caribbean that have more culprits. From 3 to 4% of all networks caused the routing incident in that region. Again, dynamics is very positive. If you look at Brazil, if you look at Indonesia, it's great reduction of number of networks that caused an incident almost twice. That's very good dynamics. So let's come back to this graph that I presented first, and let's talk about this action. Because all these three circles, they are really enablers of this action. And what is missing in this action is a concerted action by many. Because only when many networks take this action, we can see significant improvements in the routing system. So let's look who can take this action. And well, I classify the networks into sort of 4 buckets. It's edge and access networks, it's transit providers, content cloud, and internet exchange points. Let me go one by one and see what these networks can do, in fact, to improve the situation. The edge, I think for the edge network, which is an enterprise or access network, situation is pretty straightforward because ultimately edge network knows what prefixes they operate, what networks they operate. So implementing egress controls should be pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, this is not always done because I think people think, what could possibly go wrong here? Now, a situation becomes more messy if an edge network is multi-home because it's very easy to become a transit provider all of a sudden and create a route leak, which can cause damage not only for the network itself, but for surrounding environment. Of course, edge network can register routing information they intend because they operate, they own this address space, so that will enable relying party, other networks to validate, reducing the risk of routing incidents and hijacks. And I think for edge network, it's much better to partner with security, with a connectivity provider that understands routing security, that implements routing controls. That will not only protect the network from its own mistakes, but also protect from mistakes of other customers. For instance, if other customer creates a route leak, that will affect this network. The transit. Well, Job Snyder's cites an old Dutch proverb that once man into an eBGP out is another man's eBGP in. Well, that's exactly where transit can help. It's another line of defense that can compensate for whatever mistakes an edge network has done. There is a business case for transit to enable filtering and not allow an edge to announce more than the edge operates. Again, route leaks. There were many cases where route leak caused significant damage for transit networks and its customers. Ensure correctness of this routing information that can be challenging given the tools we're using, especially if you're using IRR. Also the challenge in semantics. Semantics is not always clear. For instance, ISZ, people document in ISZ all kinds of things, not necessarily their customer codes, and that causes a bit of trouble. Also, when we talk about transit, it's it's clear that the higher the tier of the transit provider is, the more difficult it is to enable more accurate controls. Content and cloud. They have vast peering relationships. For them, it's very important that they implement egress filtering. Ingress filtering, the business case for ingress filtering is less clear. However, if cloud provider has external dependencies, those dependencies may be subject for hijacking. And for instance, Route 53, this incident was discussed in the previous presentation, that's a clear case why content cloud should implement ingress filtering. Of course, it would be great if content can register their routing information for the same reason that edge networks should do that, to enable others to perform route validation from content. Finally, Exchange. Exchange is in a great position to significantly improve routing hygiene in multilateral peerings. Many exchanges run facility which is called route server, and implementing whitelist filtering on the route server can significantly improve routing security in this environment, creating safe neighborhood, but also enabling sort of sense of collective security and collective responsibility. So I hope this sort of short tour indicates that already with some simple actions, those actors can make a difference. So each player can contribute to the routing security. I think if you ask a network, would network prefer a more safe environment they operate? Of course, the answer is yes. But most of these networks, they have little incentive. Because if you look strictly at the situation, that security of your network is not only your task. It's also a task of other networks in the internet to secure your own network, which is sort of, a bit of a disconnect and lack of incentive. So if you look at this list, I think we have what is in social science called a collective action problem. And collective action problem is a situation which is less of an issue when you have a small community, when you sort of can agree quite easily. But while community grows bigger, while there is a disconnect, communication disconnect in particular, then the conflicting interest of participating parties do not allow them to collaborate, despite the common benefit. So one of the solutions to a collective action problem is the norms. And the norms is something that is based on common values that is supported by certain behaviors. And if we translate this into routing space, I think the common value is pretty clear. We all would like to have a resilient, secure global routing system. And we know the behaviors. I mean, those sort of actions, I didn't tell you anything new, I'm sure. Those sort of behaviors, they're pretty undisputed, right? Although not widely deployed. But behaviors, they're not norms, right? So it takes some effort, well, maybe not some, but significant effort to move those behaviors to norms. What has to happen? First of all, they have to be widely accepted as good practice, right? They cannot be too high, because then we cannot expect wide adoption, but they shouldn't be too low, because then it makes no difference. And what's important, it should be very visible who actually sticks to those norms, who doesn't. And that should be supported by measurable metrics. So let me just go and show you some possible baselines for those players that we just discussed and see if it makes sense. So if we look at the operators, those sort of common behaviors that have potential to become norms are filtering. Filter your customer cone, filter your own announcements. Do not pollute the global routing system with incorrect routing information. Anti-spoofing. In cases where it's low risk, please perform anti-spoofing. Do not allow traffic with spoofed source IP addresses. Coordination, be open to coordinate that others can contact you if they need your help in mitigating a routing incident. And global validation, which really talks about register your routing information, your intent, so others can make informed decisions while they're accepting announcement originated from you. Internet exchange points, well, I mentioned route server, and if Internet exchange point filters, perform strict filtering, whitelist filtering on the route server, only allows announcements from their peers that are registered, for instance, in IRR or RPKI, that will create a much more high hygiene in this environment. Promote this culture of security, promote those baselines among the members. That's a very effective action, I say. Other things like protecting peering platform, facilitating communication, and supporting their members with monitoring and debugging tools, those are, I think, reasonable and useful actions. If we look at the content, and this is work in progress, again, content can do multiple things. First of all, prevent propagation of incorrect routing information, both from ingress and egress points of view. Anti-spoofing, again, communication, global validation, register information in routing repositories. Promote culture of collective responsibility and collective security, and again, support peering partners with monitoring and debugging tools. So I think this set of actions, they sound reasonable. They are tightly scoped, they are optimized for low risk and low cost of deployment. They also have community behind it that supports those actions. Add here some transparency and monitoring. And I think we have a good foundation for those actions to be moved into the space of norms. And that's what MANAS, which stands for Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security, is about. Now, N is very important here, but I don't think we are there yet. I think we need to do some work here, and that's why I'm presenting it. So why join MANAS? If the network doesn't implement those controls, I think it's time to think about this. And that could be a good first step because it's not a very high baseline to improve routing security in your network. And that has added value, that brings benefits immediately. But that could be a first step on a long trajectory of improving routing security. If the network implements these controls, I think it's important that this network stands behind and demonstrate that those practices are not just paperwork or slideware. They have real deployments and real networks that stand by. Building community, demonstrating that community of network operators can address those challenging issues is extremely important. And that's why we ask people to join MANAS. And well, we're not there yet, but I think MANAS is taking momentum and can be used as a competitive differentiator in your sort of partnering with other networks. Now, is MANAS taking off? So this effort started in 2014, November 2014, so it's what, more than 4 years ago. And you can see that over last year, really the level of awareness, the level of interest, and I think in general, we can see that interest to routing security has increased. And this graph shows some positive dynamics that we would like to see being continued. So what are we doing to increase adoption? And when I say we, it's not Internet Society, which is supporting this initiative strongly, but also the community, the MANAS community that are acting as ambassadors. Well, one thing is, of course, looking at the incentives. Another thing is lowering barrier for adoption. And barrier for adoption is, for instance, providing more guidance to networks how to implement those simple actions. Implementation guide, which is now a RIPE document as well, is available for that. Based on this guide, we developed online modules where people in interactive mode can sort of, learn or refresh their memory how those actions can be implemented. We are releasing a hands-on lab, which is an online lab, which allows a student or a network engineer to sort of, clear slate network, make this network MANAS compliant, i.e. implement those 4 actions. The network will be available online and will run on platforms like Cisco, like Juniper, MikroTik. And we're working with training partners, trying to incorporate this in their training curricula. For instance, this lab can be used as an exam in some of the training courses. I talked about transparency and measuring stuff. I think that's very important. That's also very important for the reputation of the whole effort, because right now, if you look at MANAS, you just see a list of 130 networks that sort of stated that they implement those actions. In fact, when a network joins this initiative, we perform checks. Those checks are not sort of publicly available, and therefore we're not completely transparent. So this is not a public knowledge. I'm telling you this. But what we're trying to do, we're trying to start measuring this stuff. We're trying to start measuring level of MANAS readiness, what we call, of participating and even not participating networks, just to see also the state of routing security in the internet in general, and also being able to look at the trends, how the things are evolving. Are efforts like MANAS have any impact on routing security? So that's what we call MANAS Observatory and member report, which provides more detailed information for members and informing them of any shortcomings they might have. So this is work in progress. We are planning to release quite soon the public version of the MANAS Observatory, where people can look at sort of how routing system is involved, and members will be able to look how their networks are behaving vis-a-vis their commitments that they stated when they joined this effort. And we hope that will also stimulate some community sort of work and interaction. So to finish my presentation, I would like to suggest a little poll. If you don't mind, if you can go to this URL to Slido, go to slido.com, your browser, and enter this code. And there are only 2 questions, and they are very easy questions, multiple choice, so nothing, it's not an exam. Right. So how many people managed to get to Slido? Okay. So here's a question. So the approach, the MANAS approach, is really based on norms, right? So what do you think? Do you think norms are the solution to the routing security problems? Or you think that natural diffusion of technologies, whatever technologies developed in the IETF, right, will solve the problem by themselves? Or you think we need help from, I don't know, regulators, right, to tell us what to do, and that's the solution? So you see there's certain competition between natural diffusion and regulation.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. One of the problems with general problems with polls is that the questions actually frame the potential answers. So if you ask me that, I'll say, no, natural diffusion of security technology doesn't happen. But that doesn't mean that security technology cannot be propagated. But is that something that requires norms?
Okay, well, then let's move to, I take your point, Riga. I understand this. Well, here we try to contrast at least some possible approaches, right? So we put the 3 buckets. One is moving through the norms, moving through whatever can support diffusion of technology, and regulation. So I think that's okay. Let's move to another question. Thank you. So the question is, what needs to happen to really move those practices into norms? The approach I presented today is, we believe, MANAS, or something like MANAS, where we corral people and create strong global reference which can also be used by other efforts, other security efforts which may be more comprehensive and more fundamental. But I think what is important is that's why the title of the presentation, Concerted Action, that we all act in the same direction, that we all align. And we believe something simple like manners can provide this global reference.
Let me do the devil's advocate again. As I'm looking at the questions, I would say, in my opinion, the word strong reference at manners is something that I do not match.
Well, then I suggest you vote for You Are Dreaming or something like this. Okay, folks, thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, I'll close this poll. Those results are very useful. Thank you very much. And if you could switch back to the next slide. I think that's the last slide. And at the bottom is a small video. I think the slides will be available. I mean, please click, watch this video. It probably tells more and better than my presentation about manners. In a more sort of entertaining way. Thank you.
Matt Pitak, great talk. One challenge I think we always face is that as a community, we're rather insular. We aren't the ones that really drive the resource allocation within the companies. The consumers out there do. With the IPv6 effort, we actually had branding that went onto boxes on CPE, and there was a publicly visible campaign for selecting device manufacturers that were actually adopting the IPv6 standards. With this, we're just talking amongst our community, but we're not the ones spending the money, we're not the ones driving the machine. Have you thought about having a public campaign that says, hey, don't select an ISP unless they've adopted the manners methodologies here, unless they are manners compliant, have the little sticker on their website or some other thing that says they are acting in the benefit of the entire community. That's where the drivers for change are going to come from. That's where the money impact is going to come from. It can't just be us engaging in a mental masturbation exercise here as a community. It has to be something where the money flowing in really shifts based on, are you a good citizen of the community or not? So bring it outside the group here, make it publicly visible, and I think you're onto something.
So just to quickly answer your question, we haven't started this campaign, but what we did a year ago, I think we contracted a research analyst company, 451 Research, to look at the perception of sort of potential customers and their providers on manners. And the outcome of this research was quite positive, saying that the consumer, well, by consumer I mean like enterprises, for instance, right? Consumers' objectives for connectivity security are very much aligned with manners objectives, right? And therefore, they were even willing to pay more for a connectivity provider that supports manners, right? Now, in reality, for this to happen, and 451 said, well, no one is going to pay more, but you may expect less discounts in negotiations, for instance. But
they can certainly make it an asking point
But what needs to happen, I think what we need to develop manners as a trademark, as a quality mark, need to become stronger. So the efforts I showed also on the reputation and visibility and transparency of this effort, I think that goes into this direction. I feel right now and that's my personal opinion, that's not my initiative, that's community initiative. I feel it's not strong enough. I think we're building enough awareness, but it's not strong enough to project this as a quality mark.
It's internal awareness, that external awareness, that quality mark. You're going in the right direction then, thank you.
Matt Ringel, Akamai Technologies. So given that, much to Matt's point about points of leverage, but also to previous talks regarding conft is going to be something that goes away, at least in terms of common operations. Where have there been any efforts to work with, people who are doing stuff with NetEng code and what have you, to actually automate or make automatable the things that are part and parcel of manners, so that you get more leverage, saying it isn't just, okay, do these 35 steps and then I think you're okay, as opposed to actually making it something more modular. It's like, add this to your config, or things along those lines.
So, well, not specifically working with them, right? So those efforts are taking place. There is no real collaboration between manners, but I think we're looking at this. For instance, what we plan to do, we plan to sort of create an area on the manners website which will refer to those projects, open source projects primarily, that actually provide these modular tools either in RPKI or in IRR world to enable this automation of building filters, for instance, and other things that support manners actions.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Anish Sheikh from Google. I just wanted to ask if you've given thought to, following up on the questions around visibility and observability, do you think that we'll get to a point where you actually revoke the membership of manners members when they don't adhere to some of the norms? And I guess related to that is, what do you think has stopped some of the larger networks from joining manners in the time that it's been established?
So, well, one other thing that there is no one to revoke membership, right? I think the membership, the community itself should decide when the members no longer belong to this group, right? Mm-hmm. And for this, this community needs information. So we discussed this with the community, and one of the things that we need some measurements on how members sort of stand vis-a-vis their commitment is that information upon which members can decide to, I don't know, expel, or maybe that's just public opinion that you don't get, you get negative publicity if you stay on the manners membership list and you're not behaving correctly. Now, this is something for the membership decide, right? Right now, what we're providing some tools to inform them, right, about their level of commitment. Whether it gets publicly exposed, at what stage, I think that's for the members to really discuss and decide. But that is to say that there is no, right now, there is no mechanism to revoke membership, right? There is also no processes to continuously monitor level of performance of members. That needs to happen before those mechanisms can create it. But we're working in this direction, yes. Thanks. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.